Hello, my friends. I've got a great conversation with Brian Beutler joining me just a moment. Brian is one of my favorite political thinkers and writers, and he has just launched his own Substack, his own independent media channel, and there's very few people who I would love to see do that, which is why we support folks selectively. But Brian is definitely one of the people that I'm really excited is doing that. Today, I'll introduce you to offmessage.net with Brian Beutler. That is coming up at about 10 minutes in. But first, news and notes. What's happening in your world, in your neck of the woods? I am going to have to postpone or reschedule this week's hangout because I've got a great opportunity to spend the day and night with my daughter, Ava, in Ithaca, where she's a freshman. I have not seen her since she moved out, since I said goodbye to her. Everybody else has. My parents have, my wife has, my daughter has, but I haven't been able to get up there because I've been working so much. So I'm taking tomorrow mostly off to travel, really. I'm driving to Pittsburgh today all day and then driving all day tomorrow, so I won't be able to tape any interviews, but don't fret. I taped 4 yesterday, so I'm going to try to get them all posted up for you to listen to throughout the week. Lots of really good stuff coming. But mostly, I'm really going to try to focus on my show tonight in Pittsburgh, and excited to meet a few listeners there I know are coming, and hopefully more that I haven't heard from, and then time with my girl, which is the best time of all. Can't wait to see Ava. But finally, my big new promotional and marketing idea for the podcast is to hook up with as many folks who are doing independent media as I can to promote each other. Specifically, and as much as possible, I'm going to be working with people who don't have an advertising model. I'm definitely not against it, and if I can get top money for advertisements again, I would certainly entertain it. But as of right now, I've decided to continue to hold off with any kind of paid advertisement for this program and depending fully on you, the subscriber, to keep this thing afloat. But the only way for me to keep my subscription base up is to continue to promote the show and have more people listen to it and hopefully consider $5 or more a month for it. So you're going to hear me talk with a lot of your favorite scientists, journalists, doctors, experts, artists, and other creators that you know and love, and hopefully some that you haven't heard from, especially if they have a Substack or some other blog without a podcast, without a video or audio channel to go with it. That's the plan, and I need your help. So that's my secret plan. Don't tell anyone about it except for your favorite writers and thinkers with subscription-based media channels. A lot of this is because Virginia Heffernan, who's one of my favorite people to talk to and read, included our conversation, that episode of the podcast, in her Substack. And I was like, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, maybe they don't think of it, but I'm going to ask them to now. And I think it's going to be a really excellent way to promote the podcast. So look forward to more of those independent media creators who you know and love. And most importantly, who do you subscribe to? Email me now. I can't get enough emails and ideas on this. Who else do you subscribe to? standupwithpete@gmail.com. Whether it's Substack or Patreon or anything else, if you support independent creators, artists, journalists, whoever they are, I'd love to know who those folks are and invite them to join me in conversation here on Stand Up. All right, that's the notes, and now here is the news. Just a few bullet points for you that I'm going to read. And let me know if you like when I do this, because I always think when people talk too much, it's kind of boring or annoying. I'll try to do it as succinctly as possible. Here's what I've got. The latest on Israel-Palestine war. That's kind of how the hashtag I've been using. First shipment of U.S. weapons arrived in Israel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading there. After retaking towns near Gaza, the Israeli military is preparing for a major offensive. Israel clashed with Hezbollah on the border with Lebanon in the north there. Experts are worried about a broader conflict. I think that's something we should think a lot more about. I'll ask Aaron David Miller about that, scheduled to talk to him next. Residents of Gaza say Israeli airstrikes have hit schools, hospitals, and mosques, structures that are normally safe. Israel says it's targeting only sites connected to Hamas. Israel's military and spy operations are world-class, but their failures led to the worst breach of Israeli defenses in half a century. The New York Times has an article about that. I think that's a really important point. The security failures, well, how did they miss this is always the question one asks on a Pearl Harbor, a 9/11, or this, whatever it will eventually be called. Hamas is spreading violent videos on sites with minimal content moderation, like Twitter, which is really, really just more of a consequence of Elon Musk's takeover there. A student group at Harvard blamed Israel for the violence and received a furious response. You might have heard about that, including the president of the college throwing those student groups under the bus. It is a confusing time. It is a scary time. You can be forgiven for, A, not understanding the history of the conflict. There seem to be many different versions. It depends on what timeline you start with and which is the most possible objective points made on those timeline, and it is long and complicated. You can be forgiven for not understanding the relationships that other countries in the region and around the world have here. There is so much to learn and understand, and I'll continue to try to bring on experts to help us understand this. It's an issue that I have been talking with experts about for years and years now, over 10 years that I've been talking with folks about it on and off the air, and I am cognizant of the sensitivities and will do my best to continue to have these conversations here for you. There's plenty related to it that I didn't mention in that quick roundup, but in other political news, Congressman George Santos has now been charged with more crimes, now charged with stealing donors' identities and credit card details. That's shocking that he's been charged with more crimes and that he's still serving in Congress. Yep. Well, what do you expect about these Republicans in the House? They remain divided, by the way, over who to nominate for Speaker. They're scheduled to vote on that today. Former disgraced President Trump is losing his mind increasingly every day on his third-rate social media platform. He also endorsed former news lady and now professional conspiracy theorist Carrie Lake for Arizona Senate. Of course, she falsely claimed the 2020 election was rigged, and that is the threshold, the litmus test. As long as you buy and sell the big lie, he will still support you. What a thing to sell out on, by the way. The Biden administration declared the military takeover in Niger in July a coup, cutting off hundreds of millions of dollars in aid there. Humanitarian assistance, however, will occur, as it will into the Gaza Strip, apparently, from other international aid agencies. A powerful earthquake in northwestern Afghanistan has killed 1,000 people there, many of them because they live in buildings made of mud and bricks. But many of the survivors there have lost most, if not all, of their immediate family. Tragic story unfolding in Afghanistan. And more sad news. Hughes Van Ellis, who as an infant survived a 1921 racist massacre that killed hundreds of black residents in Tulsa, Oklahoma, has died. He was 102. I think there are two remaining survivors that are like 106 and 108 still alive. Also, I saw this news about Mary Lou Retton. I think everybody knows who she is, right? The Olympic gymnast who we all fell in love with and supported when we were growing up. She apparently is very ill. I think maybe has pneumonia. She's in the ICU and not breathing on her own, according to her family. And they are asking for money because she has no health insurance. But then people are also tweeting that she has an $8 million home. I don't know what is true, but if it's true that Mary Lou Retton does not have health insurance, and it's because she lives in the state of Texas, which is what I'm hearing, I need you to fact check all of that. Why do I feel like Tina Winsett's all over it? Anyway, let me know what you think about that story and its veracity. Professional dumb shit and former football quarterback Aaron Rodgers was on an ESPN show, as a matter of fact, challenging Travis Kelce to a debate around vaccines. And he says he'll bring RFK Jr. with him, and Travis Kelce can bring, I don't know, Anthony Fauci. Boy, I hope that they don't further this conversation, and ESPN should be ashamed for having Aaron Rodgers on. And you should be ashamed if you root for him or any team that he plays for. I quit rooting for the New York Jets when they signed him, and now he's hurt, and so I'm confused. But I still say, go Bills! All right, well, that is the news roundup I've got for you this morning. If you like that style, let me know. I'll do more of it. If you don't and you really appreciate the sound bites, which I think are helpful, then let me know about that too. Always looking to improve, streamline, inform, enlighten the best, most efficient ways possible. But let's get to my guest. That's why you're here, Brian Beutler. Very excited for you to hear my conversation with him. But first, a word from our good friend and voiceover artist and actor, Pete Coe, for the show.
Hey there, stand-up listeners. If you think this is the same promo spot you heard previously, you'd be wrong. Because I've slightly rearranged the script for this one to remind you about the benefits of becoming a stand-up Patreon subscriber. For as little as $5 a month, you not only gain access to our member Discord channel, you can join our weekly online hangouts too, where we all happily criticize Pete's terrible fashion decisions. And also, puberty. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or visit the show's website at standupwithpete.com and click on the big red button that says Support Stand Up.
Thank you, Pico. Do what he says. You can always pay more if you want. All right. Well, my favorite new newsletter is Off Message by Brian Beutler, who's my guest today. He writes about politics, media, and culture in America and about how to see past the distorting efforts, the lies, jargon, and talking points that can make these realms so confusing. On his new Substack, offmessage.net, he says his hope is to reestablish a beachhead for a kind of liberal political journalism that has become a bit hard to find recently, but that embodies a more insurgent spirit, where it seems natural rather than heretical that new ideas and leaders should challenge older ones, and liberals have the confidence to confront the forces of reaction directly across a range of liabilities. Brian has been a reporter covering Congress, policy, politics for websites like Talking Points Memo. He was a columnist for New Republic, editor-in-chief at Crooked Media, which is all those Pod Saves America, podcasts, Empire, and he's a widely cited analyst and reporter who's launched and hosted multiple podcasts, been published in the country's most prestigious outlets, and now he's got his own, offmessage.net. And in a early piece, which he's just launched this Substack, when he's introducing himself to readers in a more personal way, he talked about his values, and I really appreciated and agree mostly and subscribe to this idea where he writes, I despise bullies. I wasn't exactly bullied as a child, but I let myself be cowed as if under threat. And I carry grudges for years against people who intentionally make life harder for others. When their comeuppance arrives, I revel in it gracelessly. He continues to say, I harbor special revulsion for the cynically cruel. I'm not exactly fond of the sadistically cruel either, but find something uniquely and contemptibly debauched about people in positions of trust and influence who are aware of humanity's propensity for barbarism and seek to exploit rather than vanquish it. I love that. And finally, he says, I was and remain aghast at how seamlessly many of Trump's White House principals and allied members of Congress and their many aides, the people who knew better, bled back into polite society after his administration. And to this day, I won't shake hands with anyone who had not meaningfully atoned. The institutions that welcomed those people back, sometimes straight away, sometimes after a brief time out, tarnish themselves forever in my mind. I just love that. And his early piece at offmessage.net that introduces you more personally to him. Very excited to have him on the show. Let's do it right now and go subscribe. Brian Beutler, welcome back.
Yes, I've got him, and I'm really excited to have him. I've followed him his whole career. I've interviewed him a couple times. I really am excited about this new adventure. Brian, welcome to Stand Up. Thank you for joining me, and congrats on your new mission, your new adventure.
Thank you. It's really great to be here.
You've worked around a lot. You've been everywhere. I mean, you've worked everywhere that you can in media. Right? You've been you worked at Crooked last, and before that, New Republic, and
that's right.
Meaning you've tasted it all. I feel.
Yeah, well, I'm 15 plus years into this career, and it's been at a time when it's a pretty itinerant profession. So a lot of us bounce around from place to place every 3, 4, 5 years, and so divide by 15, 18, whatever it's been, and yeah, something like 5 or 6 different outlets now.
But the big question is, when you go off on your own, as you are now, you don't have an editor, you don't have a team, and there's this kind of, interesting question or ethical debate around that in terms of journalism. I think you handle it really well in terms of your intro to Off Message about what you're now capable of doing. Will you be missing the guardrails, the assignments, the editors?
So I'm lucky in that my last gig entailed doing a lot of editing. My prior gigs entailed a little bit of editing, but mostly just writing. So I developed, I think, good new muscle memories, good new mental habits around it. And I do my best to make sure that I'm not just sitting in a padded room without talking to anyone else about my ideas or about my reporting, to make sure that I'm not moving off base. And then as long as your listeners are interested in just like my work methodology, is that I'll write whatever it is I intend to publish and then set it aside, usually overnight, and then wake up early and look at it with fresh eyes and try my best to be my own copy editor and my own line editor. A, so that the writing doesn't suck, but B, so that, if I've gotten over my skis or undercooked an idea. I've had time to think about it and hopefully either cut it or expand or do whatever I have to do to make it all fit together. The goal is to grow large enough that I can actually pay people to help me do that stuff instead of having to kind of farm it out to friends and former colleagues and other people that I'm kind of relying on as I launch.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that'll be the case. You're one of the most respected voices out there. I think one of the reasons I like you is not obviously, you know, kind of your moral clarity on things, your experience and your credibility and your originality. But I feel like because we're of a similar generation and age, I know how long you've been covering American domestic politics. And it's about as long as I've been covering it in completely different ways, obviously. But like, I think it's important to kind of start and think about the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration. You've seen all that. Talk to me a little bit about kind of where you started, how things were, and in any way you want, as you have been writing about, how much has changed. That's a 10-hour conversation, but I feel like the goalposts there matter to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, I developed political consciousness really in my late teens, early 20s in college. It was right after 9/11. I guess it was after Bush v. Gore, which I sort of underappreciated as a moment in when it happened as an 18-year-old person. But then it was 9/11, and it was the Iraq War and the George W. Bush administration writ large. And it was enough of an awakening that I was studying physics. I was going to go off and be a scientist. And I decided that I wanted to do journalism instead. And so after I graduated, I'd moved to Washington because based on the advice of mentors, the idea was like, go someplace that journalism is happening if that's what you want to do. So I moved to Washington, and it was the very beginning of George W. Bush's second term, and Democrats were still shell-shocked by having been defeated. They were sort of asking themselves, you know, what had they done wrong? Like, how had they gone astray in a way that alienated them from the sorts of voters that might have given Jon Carroll the election. And so they told themselves they had alienated religious voters, that they weren't credible enough on national security issues. And that dovetailed with the emergence of, I think, what we now call the netroots, which is just liberal and progressive writers, academics, reporters, who were all writing online mostly for free, who were sort of put off by the kind of self-flagellation and sort of weakness they sensed, and they were tired of losing. And so there was this widespread pressure from progressive of all stripes for Democrats to kind of think about politics in a different way and punch a little harder and just have a little bit more dignity in the face of things like swift boat style attacks. But it wasn't a perfect marriage. There was like no perfect symbiosis there. But for this brief period between the beginning of the second George W. Bush term and the election of Barack Obama, there was a sort of rising, I think, where Democrats were fighting harder than we normally expect them to. And the liberal and progressive world was of two minds. It was incredibly important to drive the Republican Party from power. It was also important to make sure that the Democratic Party got its fair share of criticism when it did things wrong, so that it would ideally improve. And a lot of that energy ended up getting subsumed within the party, absorbed into the party. Obviously, the Obama presidency had a lot of difficulties. There was a lot of resistance to it, both genuine and ginned up. It was a slog. Donald Trump won. That traumatized the whole left, I think. And so now here we are over a decade later, and I would like to rekindle that spirit, because I think it's kind of gone. And that to the extent that Democrats have a media at all, it's sort of like they're looking for an amen choir instead of voices that will try to encourage them to do things better than they're doing them. So that's why I started Off Message.
Well, I love it. I love that final point, too, as to what you're doing at offmessage.net. And everybody's got to subscribe, because Brian's stuff is so right on and original, and I think fearless, if I want to give you the highest compliment in a way, in terms of these. I love it. Yeah, I mean, you've always kind of been that way. I think that's why a lot of smart people have latched on to you. And I'm talking about, those guys at Crooked. There's a reason they brought you in. And I think it's that credibility and respect. You write in this, I think it's the most recent piece, Charts to a Gunfight, how How the Fighting Democrats of 2007 became the timid, focus grouped party of today is how I read it in my mind's voice. But you write, let me just bear with me because I think this is probably one of my most important points that I want you to expand upon. But you write, when Barack Obama launched his first presidential campaign in 2007, Democrats have been locked out of power for over 6 years. For most of that time, the public just wanted Republicans rather than Democrats to run the country. But by the final stretch, the incumbent GOP had squandered its post 9/11 goodwill. Democrats had reason to be hungry. The public had an appetite for accountability. The stars aligned for Democrats to act like the rightful majority or party in exile. Today, they look much different. Democrats have power and have done pretty well in the consecutive elections. They are trying to keep it and not win it back. They are also chastened by the challenges of the Obama presidency, the backlash to it, and the semi-permanent trauma of 2016. You just said some of that, but then you write, it didn't take long after they won a formidable governing trifecta in 2008 for doubt to creep in. They badly and mystifyingly underestimated the nihilism and extremism of the congressional GOP. And Brian, that's why I'm a fan of yours. And that's why I am bald. All of my hair lit on fire. All of my hair lit on fire at the reaction of the media, who at the time I was employed by CNN and SiriusXM. They were sending me to the Tea Party. And I was like, okay, I can tell you who is there. They're all the same people. They're very white. They're very angry about like losing their grip on dominance. It's so clear. And all we heard from corporate media was, the Tea Party movement is about fiscal concerns and so on. Bullshit. We knew what caused the crisis. And I feel like that's what you mean by mystifyingly underestimating the nihilism and extremism of the congressional GOP back in 10, 9, 8, whatever year you want to pick around. You knew that. You were saying that, right?
I would start the clock earlier. I mean, I remember learning as a cub reporter about how the filibuster works in practice. I mean, I came in literally as naive as like the cliche, this is a Mr. Smith goes to Washington thing. And only when, a principled senator thinks that something needs to be slowed down, they get up and they talk for hours and they delay the bill as long as they can. No, it doesn't work anything like that. It's literally just one person can flick a switch and say, okay, now whatever you want to do requires a supermajority to pass. And Mitch McConnell became the minority leader, and the use, of the filibuster skyrocketed to abusive levels. And I just realized that without a plan to do something about this, that any Democrat who succeeded George W. Bush was going to see their agenda stymied. Even if they won big whopping majorities, they would have to clear 60 votes in the Senate in order to be able to really implement an agenda. And so I remember talking to the Democratic presidential candidates in the 2008 primary. This was the Obama, Clinton, Edwards, et cetera primary. And basically none of them had...
As a journalist, not like as a
journalist, yes. And basically none of them had any plan at all for it. They didn't even really understand what the risk I was asking them about was. Like they weren't able to peer that far into the future and think, well, I'm going to win an election. Of course, Mitch McConnell is just going to stop and act like a more normal congressional leader at that point. And I'm like, I covered him. I don't think you're right about that. And like, of course, Obama won. He did for a brief period of time have 60 votes. And it was still, because of Mitch McConnell and the filibuster abuse, very difficult to pass anything. And the party was just not constituted right to react to it, where, you would think that a party that was like confident in itself would say, this is outrageous. We just won 2 landslide elections in a row. We need to be able to govern. We need to do something about the filibuster. But here we are 15 years later, and the party is still kind of, it's moved in the direction of filibuster reform, filibuster abolition, but it hasn't gotten there yet. And I don't think that like length of time reflects super well on how the party is led, constituted, who they recruit to be candidates in the Senate. And I do think over time it will get better. I mean, the more recent candidates, they are anti-filibuster. And I think by attrition, eventually the whole Democratic Party will be, and then maybe something will happen. But it was just, I could sense that this was going to happen because I was just watching what they were doing in the last couple of years of the Bush administration. And I knew that it was going to continue if Obama won, but the party wasn't ready for it. And then, as you mentioned, the Tea Party rose in conjunction with the John McCain's defeat in 2008, and obviously the fact that the president was Barack Obama, and the media did kind of take the figureheads of that movement at their word when they said it was about budget deficits and things like that, suddenly discovering that they supposedly care about those things. And I don't think that the Democratic Party was that naive. I don't know that they really bought it, but they bought into it, if you know what I mean. Like, they were intimidated enough by this backlash to Obama and to the Affordable Care Act and things like that, that they embraced austerity budgeting. And it was to the detriment of their party and also to the country. It caused a lot of pain. And I think it was unnecessary.
I think that if most people who listen to this program and stuff that I do are progressive, I suppose you could probably talk about how siloed and we all are in terms of our biases. But I mean, I read you a lot for the criticism of the progressive movement, the Democrats in Congress, in terms of their strategies and what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And in this piece, you talk a lot about, make this brilliant point about science and how we liberals have gotten really attached to that word and that talking point when it comes to things like climate. And it's a one thing you can say to divide yourself. Well, I'm a science debates guy. Well, that was effective. I think I agree with this. That was effective for a while. It's not now, because everybody that I talk to on the internet is actually a scientist. They all are. They've all done, well, they've all looked it up and they've done their research. So they all have. But you bring this point to the science of polling and how Democrats have mistakenly become reliant on that and what it creates, because it creates these media narratives, and it's also tied in. And that's why I think this piece and, you know, your work overall is very important for people to read and understand that nuance. Talk about the Democrats and reliance on polling, what it's gotten right and wrong, and what it's led both the party and the movement and media to do as a result.
Yeah, I'd say it's an over-reliance on data and polling and surveys, because you wouldn't want a party that never consulted public opinion.
Right.
Because that would be a recipe for disaster. I don't even think you would necessarily want the Democrats to be like the Republicans, who they do consult polling, but they basically seize opportunities as they sense them and will latch onto them and say what they need to say about them.
Reactionary, is that
the moment? Yeah, it's a reactionary tendency. It can be very effective, but to do it well, you have to actually abandon the idea that you need to be consistent about anything. So I don't think you would want the Democrats to go in that direction either. At least I wouldn't. But I think that if you believe that winning elections is sort of a simple matter of doing your polling well and then following the polls where they say to go, you're going to end up in this really uncanny place with politicians who are either forget what they genuinely believe or are too scared to talk about it in genuine terms to convince people that they stand for anything. And I think what's happened, since the days when Democrats would use the word science as a cudgel to sort of communicate to voters, hey, Republicans are anti-science. Yeah. They deny climate change. They're in the pocket of big oil. They never listen to experts on anything, and that's why the country's in such a bad state. That was a useful and important thing for them to say, but I think that because the scientific method and small L liberalism kind of go hand in glove together, that this snowballed into a culture within the Democratic Party of assuming that complicated things like elections and policy design even could be perfected by getting enough data and following the polls. And I think that is mistaken. And it leads to sort of perverse functioning. I mean, you would want the party to be nimble enough that once the halls of Congress were cleared of insurrectionists on January 6th, that the leaders of the party could just realize, okay, this was horrible, but also something has to be done about it. And if we do something about it, the public will be on our side about it. Let's impeach Donald Trump right now. But there was no desire on the part of the leadership to act immediately. And I think that it stems from this basic thing. It's like, first, we have to see if public opinion is on our side, if the public will back us, if we go to an impeachment. And so they adjourn the House and it it sets back the accountability moment for Donald Trump by weeks. And that's just like one example of how I think that it sort of makes the party like incapable of responding to unpredictable developments as they happen, because they're like, well, we're only going to do things that we think are predictable. Then the public supports these policies, so we're going to talk about those. And the public likes these messages, so we're going to talk about those. And that works perfectly well, or would work perfectly well, if the world was static and surprises didn't happen. But it's full of surprises, and parties need to be able to respond to them. And the everything is, in some sense, a science mentality has, I think, rendered Democrats unable in many cases to respond to those kind of surprises.
Yeah, you say a don't poke the bear mentality has thus come to dominate center-left politics, and it often manifests as reactive scolding of progressive activists, their bolder policy goals, their intersectional politics, their pointy-headed idioms, anything that might upset the bulk or that scans as an argument for banishing Trump voters from the big tent should be muffled. If it might make Democrats seem moderate, it's worth doing, irrespective of whether it concedes to much of the right or reinforces harmful stereotypes about the left. I mean, you just basically said some of that, but obviously you wrote it very succinctly and accurate. I don't know if you want to add anything to what I just read from your piece here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say that, like, it is reasonable at some level for other critics of the Democratic Party, or other people who are rooting for the Democratic Party, say, to want Democratic Party politicians, Democratic Party activists to not get over their skis, not embrace policy ideas that get too far ahead of the public. That in some sense, if you want to optimize everything, what slogans you use, what policies you support, those things do matter. But that it's a little strange to make that's not the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is whether the leadership of the party is able to be a competent opposition to the GOP. Once they got that down, then we can sort of nitpick about what the agenda should be and how Democratic lawmakers should talk about it. And we can scold progressive activists for getting too far over their skis or whatever. But there's this, like, there's a heart beating from the mix, and it's the impassioned party leader who understands their opponent's vulnerability and seizes on them, makes them pay a price for them, and then sees that reflected in election results. And if that's all working well, okay, let's talk about some more nitpicky things. But I don't think it's working very well right now.
Right. I think, and you wrote a piece about this, I think, focused on Biden's age, but it's my understanding, I have a feeling that you are like me in that you're a bit of an ageist when it comes to people serving in public office, when it comes to a senator who's 90 or a president. And I don't think there's anything wrong with folks wanting young people to take action and have responsibility for their future. The policies that are being made by people, say, our age and older, frankly, are not going to affect those people. They're going to affect these young people, my daughters. So the idea that there's a lot of new young blood in the Democratic Party, I'm very impressed by and inspired by the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Jasmine Crockett's. I'm also impressed by some of the older guard, but not so old, Jamie Raskins. The way, I'm a performer, the way that they talk, the way that they argue, and frankly, the way that they put up, especially a lot of these women, especially a lot of these brown and black women, like they're not putting up with bullshit, and they're putting that on the record as well. I'm impressed and inspired by a lot of these new younger-ish Democrats. But what are you saying about why age matters in this movement or in public life, in politics, and specifically in government? Maybe I'm reading it wrong, and forgive me for calling you ageist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you abstracted Joe Biden out of the equation, like him, the person, 80 years old, he presents as an elderly person now, and just said the president is named X, and these are his policy accomplishments. Young people would be generally pleased with what they heard, right? They like the Inflation Reduction Act, biggest climate bill in history. And when you poll young people, climate is a huge issue for them, and they want a president who makes progress on it.
Guns, abortion.
Exactly. But if you reinsert Biden into the picture in the context of a party that has a lot of senior citizens in its leadership ranks, you get the polling results that you find, which is that young people are pretty disaffected with the Democratic Party. And if you listen to why, they say it's because the party is led by people who don't resemble me. They don't reflect my views. There's just a distrust. And I think it stems in part from what we were talking about earlier. It's like this sense that like every election is the most important election of our lifetimes. You've got to vote. You got to vote as if your life depends on it. And at the same time, the party is highly tolerant of like elderly people in positions of power who could become sick or they could die, and it could throw everything into chaos. And it's like, well, is this really existential, or are you bullshitting me? And that is sort of distinct from the question of what have Democrats accomplished policy-wise.
Yeah.
But I believe the young people when they say that matters to them. And so what do you do? So it doesn't, like, you can't get rid of Joe Biden. You can't just wish him away. But like, I think Joe Biden could say to those voters, you have a point. I get it. And I want you to know that like, we are going to take some steps to like make our party better resemble what you're describing.
Really tiny little old Joe Biden steps.
Yeah. shuffle in that direction.
I'm such a dick. People are mad at me right now for saying that. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. Like that, but that's part of what I'm getting at, is that this should be fine, right? Nobody should listen to this and worry that we're creating this sort of divided front or fracturing the left and it's going to help Republicans. This is just like valid, important criticism, and people should be open to it. And I think that, just like, look, our time is coming to an end and you guys are going to take over, and we're going to be there. Those of us who remain to offer guidance if you seek it. I think a message like that would, it's not going to please everyone. He's not going to go from like 30% with young voters to 100% or whatever, but it will help. And if this is the party that genuinely takes survey results seriously and thinks that survey results have all the answers, well, the survey results kind of point in the direction of what you might do to alleviate the anxieties or the grievances of the young voters in your coalition who you absolutely need ahead of the 2024 election. So, that's sort of what I was getting at in the piece I wrote about Biden and the Democrats' old age problem.
I got to just ask you one more question about Democrats, and we can talk about Republicans for a minute here, I hope. But the issue I'm seeing locally, I live in Mike Lawler's district, the great Mike Lawler, and he won here. And I think it's plus 12 or plus 12 Biden, and yet a Republican won. And I'm worried, being very active, and I'm sure a lot of people are concerned about the issue around immigration, this migrant crisis that we're seeing and how it plays out. My neighbors love to dehumanize people. Like they get off on it. They love dehumanizing people. If they're not like Irish, Italian, Catholic firefighters, then you're bad, or cops, like everybody else. But so how do Democrats deal with this issue? I keep saying over and over, and I hope you agree and would add to it, that the issue here is one that the federal government has to deal with. You need congressional legislation, and everywhere I go, especially in corporate media, I remind them of 2013 comprehensive immigration reform that passed out of the Senate with Republican support. And then John Boehner wouldn't take it up for a vote because he knew that wedge issue would be gone and that dog would catch the car like abortion did, and it would hurt them maybe. But in lieu of the fact that we're not getting congressional comprehensive immigration reform anytime soon, what can the Democrats do with an issue that is a real issue for sure? Immigration will always be an issue for every country.
Part of it is sort of saying what you just said is like Republicans won't take yes for an answer, and this is an issue that requires federal response. But they enjoy it when they can detect a caravan of migrants walking north through Mexico, because they think they can demagogue it and they think that they can make Americans angry and turn that into votes. And so they don't want a solution. And so this is what they want.
Can. I mean, they think they can. They can, and they do. Right.
Well, they did. I mean, to be honest, I think that the Republican Party's record of exploiting like fears about immigration and migrants and caravans and the border and all that is like very mixed. They seem to think that it's an issue that can't fail for them. But I mean, they've been running that same play every election since Trump won in 2016, and they haven't been doing great in those elections. So I don't actually think that there's a huge this is something that Democrats need to fear. As they press the issue, they should continue. I actually don't know sitting here if Joe Biden has endorsed any legislation, Democratic legislation or bipartisan legislation that would do something like the 2012 immigration bill, combine border security with effective internal enforcement and pathway to citizenship, or citizenship for dreamers, or whatever it is. There's so much groundwork that has been laid, but you can't pass anything without Republicans, and Republicans want the issue.
Right.
So there's that half of it. And then, what Republicans are doing when they demagogue immigration, or when they demagogue any issue, is they're doing something that I call, in the political science, called agenda setting, which is they're using their official powers and their influence, their stage presence, their audience to try to get the country and its media focused on a thing, right? And in the case of voters, worried about a thing and willing to vote for Republicans over a thing. I just generally wish Democrats would use their agenda setting power better, more effectively, even though it doesn't feel good because you're just beating a drum about the same thing over and over again. And I think it probably feels manipulative to be like, I want people to focus on X, so we're just going to have committee hearings about X, and we're going to say X in front of the camera over and over and over again. But it's really important, if you want people to base their voting decisions on the things you care about or that you think are important.
And it does work. Progressives and Democrats are vulnerable to it. And I just, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Bernie Sanders, billionaires and millionaires. And I'm also thinking of just the fact that Republicans are so good at this. They just replaced a line. I mean, you and I have been covering this long enough to remember Sharia. It was Sharia, and of course then the caravan and the immigration, and then CRT, and they just put it out there over and over. It's very effective, to the point that people are erupting at school board meetings about ghosts, about things that are not happening, just because they said it enough times. Why are progressives and Democrats not necessarily vulnerable to that kind of repeated messaging of something they would care a lot about?
I mean, I think a lot about how much national attention has been paid to Hunter Biden. President's son has legal troubles, seemingly unethical guy, at least when Joe Biden was vice president and after his vice presidency. Troubled person, complicated story. Republicans have turned him into a boogeyman and convinced half the country that the president was in league with him or in business with him and that they were doing this corruption together. And I mean, Democrats can spend their time trying to fact check that if they want, and I guess they probably should to some extent. But if the idea here is that the president's children shouldn't be doing corrupt things, and if they are, it's a scandal, and the public should care about it. Well, Donald Trump made his children senior White House officials. They corrupted policy while they were in office for their own benefit, and then they left office and took $2 billion from the Saudis, who are now trying to get Donald Trump reinstalled in the presidency. And this is all really important, but it's not something that figures largely in cable news coverage or it doesn't make the front page of the New York Times. And part of the reason it doesn't is because while Republicans are over here in the House doing hearings and then an impeachment about nothing, right? Giving these reporters something to glom onto, what's happening in the Senate, where Democrats could, in theory, just investigate the Trump-Saudi relationship? Nothing, right? It's just not happening. I mean,
I see what you're. No, you're referring, of course, to what I call as the greatest conflict of history in American politics ever. And if a mayor appointed their relative to any job, it would be an outrage in the town. But somehow Donald Trump gets away with it.
Yeah.
And it's a slam dunk to investigate for the Senate. You're saying, why don't they? Yeah.
Well, I think I should say I do think that there is some behind the scenes investigative work being done on that. But you can tell when a party's heart is in it, right? The hearings look like something, and the cameras follow, and it's just not happening. And the reasons why are complicated. I write about them a lot at Off Message, but I do think that getting it right would improve Democrats' political fortunes, and then there'd just be less for people within the liberal and progressive movement to be anxious about and fight over.
Yep.
We could spend our time worrying about policy design and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think I'm over my time. You got to go, but because we didn't even talk about Republicans, I wanted to ask you, of course, about Trump and your piece on him reaching a fateful crossroads, not to mention the chaos in the House. So let me just ask you that one last one about the House. Cormac McCarthy. Is that yours? Did you come up with that?
I think so.
That is hilarious. Could you you have a great piece at offmessage.net. Everybody has to subscribe right now or they hate America. 5 thoughts on Cormac McCarthy. And I mean, like, it's a perfect nickname for him because his entire career, he's pissed everybody off, apparently.
Yes. Well, he's pure ambition, right? He wanted to be speaker, and he told people what they wanted to hear and stepped on people who he thought he had to step on, said whatever he thought he needed to say to get there. And he got there, and the consequence of every step he took to reach that point left him really vulnerable to being thrown out. It didn't help that he only had like a 4-seat majority or anything like that. But like there's not a deep well of good feelings about Kevin McCarthy in American politics, because that was all he wanted, was to be speaker. There was no driving, it wasn't respect for the institution of the House, or he wasn't like a committed policy ideologue, just like wanted the title and wanted the power. He got it. And so of course, karma came and bit him in the ass. And now he's not speaker anymore. And there's still not a speaker. And it's kind of funny for the time being, but it could get bad if Republicans aren't able to get it together to either find a speaker that 218 of them can agree on, or just accept that like we're too fractious and we hate each other too much. And if there's going to be a speaker, it's going to have to be one that can get a lot of Democratic votes, and then we'll have a sort of power sharing. Well,
that's probably an unlikely scenario. So just disabuse me of this notion that, and unless I'm wrong, that the more extreme Republicans in the House get and the more trouble they have over the next year, the better it is for Democrats' opportunity to take back the House. And while that's not great for the country, there was nothing that, no matter who is the House Speaker or the Republican leader, any piece of legislation that was going to pass through the Senate and the president that was actually going to make a big difference. But they are in charge of budgeting and the government shutdown. So there could be really bad consequences. But my larger, more long-term question is, the more extreme they get, the more they eat each other alive, cannibalize each other, the better it is for Democrats to take back the House next year. No?
Yeah, well, I think it sort of depends who they make the speaker, right? If it's Jim Jordan, this maniac with the Ohio State wrestling sex scandal in his background, like that is useful.
And the insurrection.
And the insurrection. I mean, you want to believe that Democrats would exploit it, but part of what we've been discussing here is my concern that they don't really react to opportunities like that the way they should. But he would be on TV screaming his head off, so at least they'd have that. Republicans like Mike Lawler, who you mentioned just a few moments ago, would have to vote to make him speaker, or 3 or 4 Republicans would get to take a pass. But basically everyone in the conference would have to vote for him. So that vote would hang over their heads. If they go without a speaker for a long time, there will almost certainly be a government shutdown. Republicans would be to blame for that, and I think would receive the blame for it. I don't see any obvious way that this kind of dysfunction leaving a power vacuum in the House or filling the vacuum with a right-wing maniac doesn't help Democrats. But it does create unpredictable circumstances, which could blow back in Democrats' face. I don't know, because I don't know what they are, and will sort of give Democrats these opportunities again and again and again. Are you going to exploit this? Are you going to make political hay out of it? And off message exists because I think that more often than not, they don't have a quick and dirty response to things like Republicans vacated the speakership. They don't have somebody in wait. They might make Jim Jordan speaker. Like, these are opportunities. It's time to pounce on them. Yeah.
And I hope that, do you think they're reading? Do you think that the Congress people, much less their staffs, everybody in Washington, I bet you they're reading, right? They tell you they're reading, right? Please tell me they're reading.
Some of them are reading.
Offmessage.net, you should be reading and subscribing. I am so excited that you're doing this. And I hope that we can talk again. Thank you so much for giving me so much time. I could take up the rest of your day, but I bet you have more off messaging to work on.
I do have to write, but no, it was great to be here. And honestly, thank you very much for saying all that about off message.
You got it, man. We'll talk again.
All right, there you go. Brian Beutler, what did you think? Offmessage.net, check it out and check him out at the show notes because everything for Brian is linked there. I hope to work more with him, and that is what I've got for you today. I've got to get on to the next one, which should, I think, be Aaron David Miller. We'll see if I can get it up before I jump in the car. But thank you so much for supporting me on this program and every day with a paid subscription. Go to patreon.com/PDominic if you haven't already. Jon Carroll writes most of the music for the program. But if you're a musician, always happy to hear from you, or you want to contribute to the show in any way, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Take it away, John.
The forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up, you got to stand up, you got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.